Okay, my loves. I know there are a lot of you that are out there that are really wondering, how do I even set boundaries anymore? Maybe you didn't grow up with great boundaries. Maybe boundaries weren't really modeled well for you, or maybe you were told that you cannot have boundaries. Maybe you're tired of being gaslighted in your relationships, and you're tired of feeling crazy all the time and guilty for trying to make a difference in your life. If this is you, then I want you to come schedule a call with me. Let's chat about the Unashamed Image Program. The Unashamed Image Program is geared towards you specifically. I am going to be helping you in our next upcoming session of the Unashamed Image. I am personally going to train you how to not feel crazy when someone is gaslighting you, how to be able to stand your ground, to keep your boundaries intact, and to also see through the bull crap. I am also going to be teaching you how to set really confident boundaries that you can really rely on. And I'm going to help you communicate them in a way that really makes sense. Basically, I'm going to help you live a life free of shame and on your terms. If you are ready and you are done feeling all the shame and guilt for trying to set boundaries, if you are not willing to live another moment the way you are right now and in somebody else's shadow, then this is the time to schedule that call with me. It's completely free, no pressure, just love, just support. Go to www.erinandersonthetraumacoach.com. Scroll down the page to where it says, Let's Chat About Working Together. Click on that button and it'll take you to my booking page. If you're ready to live the unashamed life, schedule that call. Let's get you in the Unashamed Image Program, my loves. From my heart to your heart. Bye. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of The Other Side of the Struggle by Erin Anderson Betrayal Trauma Coaching. I'm Erin Anderson, your host. If you're just joining this podcast, we talk about how I healed from my betrayal trauma and some of the things I've learned along the way as I continue to heal and as I coach other men and women through their traumas. Now, before we dive into this week's episode, let me tell you a little bit about how you can contact me. I have a few free Facebook groups. One of the groups are for women who are going through betrayal trauma due to a husband's addiction. In this group, women are able to voice how they feel about the struggle they are going through with the addiction, find a camaraderie of other women going through similar situations, get some detailed coaching from me, plus any other events or offers that I have going on. You can find me there at www.facebook.com/groups/the other side of the struggle. Or if you're looking for a place where you and your spouse can connect, have other really brilliant minds and coaches, therapists alike, I have some great colleagues that you can chat with as well as me in the group Positive Healing for LDS Marriages and Relationships, www.facebook.com/groups/Positive Healing for LDS Marriages and Relationships. I also have a Facebook page, www.facebook.com/BetterThanTheBetrayal. You can also find me on Erin Anderson Betrayal Trauma Coach on Instagram, or you can also find me on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/in/Erin-the Trauma Coach. So, I have been promising a gift for a while for my listeners. It's ready to give away. I'm so excited. If you are ready to understand how your trauma is actually a building block to how amazing you are, not the wrecking ball, then download my free Heart of Gold meditation. In this meditation, it will take you through a deeper understanding of how a difficult trauma can help you realize how strong you are. All of those pieces of your heart that are broken because of the trauma and because of the pain you have gone through are actually being healed together by gold. So, this is also one of my first meditations that I ever went through to regain my self-confidence, to understand how amazing I truly am, and how each one of the things that happen in my life, whether good or bad, are things that are shaping me for who I truly am and helping me see my mission and purpose and live my paradise life. So if you would like that, and if you want to gain a deep love and appreciation for yourself, then this meditation is just for you. And when you realize that the heart beating inside of your chest is truly an inspiration that is guiding your life and helping you build your paradise life with self-confidence that's difficult to shake, I think you will love this freebie. So go and download it at https://erinanderson.kartra.com/page/heart of gold. And don't worry, I will make sure to link that in the description below. With that, let's dive into this week's episode. Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of The Other Side of the Struggle. Today I have another fantastic guest speaker with me. He is my good friend and colleague, Kyson Kidd. He is the founder of Kyson Kidd Coaching and Kyson Kidd Podcast, so go check that out. And one of his favorite things to do is help men and women create immunity from porn. And where I love to teach men and women how to create a life free of trauma, I especially like betrayal trauma. And this is such a juicy thing because men and women often have spouses that deal with trauma due to a husband's addiction or a wife's addiction, even sometimes. I love working with someone like Kyson who can help people overcome the pornography problem as well. And so I'm really excited to have him on the podcast today talking with me about the trust boundary. And if you guys remember, we have been talking about the main boundaries that I have, the love boundary, we have the trust boundary, and we also next week will be talking about the organization boundary with another fantastic guest speaker. But today I asked Kyson to come and talk with us about trust because I know that is something that when you're dealing with relationships in general, and especially relationships that have been broken by trust in some way, that this is a big deal in building back relationships and also building back confidence with yourself. And I couldn't think of anybody better to chat with over this boundary than Kyson. So I'd like to welcome Kyson to the podcast.
Hey, so glad to be here. Yeah, I actually listened to your Love Boundary podcast this morning. Loved it.
Awesome.
Giving myself a haircut and just feeling into all the beautiful things you talked about. So I'm super excited.
Well, thank you. I love having other people listen to my podcast and tell me that it's good. So, because there are other times I'm like, oh man, I mucked that up. But today is not going to be one of those days. So, Kyson, give my listeners just a little bit of information about you. Tell us, how long have you been coaching? Tell us also, what got you into, helping people literally find immunity from pornography?
Yeah, I mean, wow, that question could be answered in 2 sentences or in 1,000 sentences. I'll go for right in the middle somewhere. But I so like my journey includes pornography. Like as I was growing up, I got into pornography like, you know,
Mm-hmm.
80% of most of the dudes in the world. And I used to just kind of try to run from it, try to hide from it, try to like hold on tight and do other things. And um had a few experiences in my mid 20s where I met a friend and she's like sort of inviting me to start like actually listening to my emotions and start to actually do some work on myself. And I remember this one moment specifically where I was like, I think she asked me like, "Do you struggle with shame?" And I was like, "I don't even know. Like, what are you talking about? What is that?" Um, and like, you know, 3 days later, I'm thinking about it constantly. Like, am I? And all of a sudden, it just like opened up, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, I've been running from like mountains and mountains of shame for as long as I can remember existing, basically." Just all of a sudden became really aware. Like, I've got a lot of things I could look at, um, and a lot of things that are like really holding me back. And so that's kind of when my journey started. That's about 7 years ago. And that journey is kind of a classic coach's journey, right? Where like you learn about yourself and then you're like, man, I want to start helping other people do this, and realize like, oh, I actually have a lot of gifts for helping other people in this area. Um, and so I used to do music, like yoga music is what I got
Mm-hmm.
pulled into. Like that's a very healthy use of music. And
Oh,
from
I
there,
love yoga music. I love it.
and I started to love just like having a different purpose to that, to what I was doing. I wasn't just making music to like get popular, but actually helping people. And from there, we got invited to an energy healing conference that was more like opening up to different ways of seeing the world. And really, like, I guess there's a lot of different like pieces of the puzzle, but the overarching theme is that I started to realize it's okay to like listen to my emotions. It's okay to try to understand what's going on in my heart. And then as I looked for more truth in those areas, I found power. I found like, oh, I can actually change as I go through my journey instead of just like running from my problems, running from my shame. I can actually heal. And eventually that led to overcoming my struggles with pornography. And so there are like a few different really important points for me where things shifted, and I realized like, oh, I don't have to just like run from my habits with porn. I don't have to just try to stay sober. I can actually like become totally free from it, or totally immune. That's that word we're talking about, is to
Mm-hmm.
become immune from pornography, so that I'm not constantly running from temptation, but I'm actually standing in a place of power and
I love
confidence.
this. Oh my heavens. I love this so much. And this speaks a lot to like my journey, overcoming trauma and the victim mentality. Because, it's both the trauma and the victim mentality are rooted in shame and rooted in trauma. Like they really are.
Mm-hmm.
And this is one thing I tell my clients all the time is, yes, your husband may have been dealing with pornography. But you can actually understand the mindsets that got him there. It got him to a different place than where it got you, but the mindsets are the same. And so when we empower one of us, if we empower ourselves to heal and empower ourselves to overcome the trauma, overcome, like literally become immune to the porn, by just getting in touch with what our heart is saying. Oh, it's so powerful because now, because you've been listening to what you're saying, because you're listening to your heart, you can actually recognize those same patterns in other people. You know what I mean?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, that's definitely going to connect into our conversation about trusting self today. And I love hearing you talk about power. If people like, one of my favorite moments with everybody I work with is like they usually come to me with like, "Hey, I've been struggling with porn. It's the biggest issue in my life, and I don't know how to like, like that's they see it as like this is the biggest problem in the world, and I don't know how to solve it." One of my favorite things to do is to like invite them to see it differently, that porn is actually not the problem. It's the symptom of something beneath it. And
Mm-hmm.
underneath all of it is the powerlessness. If you're feeling powerful, there's no desire for porn. There's no desire for a lot of unhealthy habits. So anyway, it's so fun to like see it that way, that like, dude, porn's not your problem. It's power. Like, where
Yeah,
have you given all
absolutely.
your power away? And it's so cool that I love that you call your podcast The Other Side of the Struggle, because like you said, it's, two people feeling powerless in a relationship. And, maybe each person has dealt with it in very different ways. And you could probably argue which one is more hurtful if you want, but ultimately it's about where is my
Well,
power and how can I step back in?
yes, and I'm definitely not going to argue the point of which one hurts more because they just both suck.
Yeah, they both.
They just both stink. And it's not fun to be in either of those places, but you're right. I mean, once one of us just claims that power and claims ownership
Mm-hmm.
of our life, and what's going on in our head and going on in our heart and paying attention, to something other than the pain, which is hard to do. Like I am not, saying that's an easy thing because when you're in pain, it's like all I can think about is the pain, right?
Mm-hmm.
But in order to heal that pain, you have to focus on something else. And so what a better thing to focus on than truth? Like what's really going on? You know what I
Mm-hmm.
mean? Cuz
I could
and
get paid
it's
to ask that question. What's really going on? I
what's
love that
really
question.
going on. I love that question too. I do too. And saying to the porn is actually a symptom, and you're right, it is. And it's the same thing with like, victim mentality. Somebody can victimize you. Like I will yeah, totally, you're right. But claiming victim is a whole different ballgame. It's a
Mm-hmm.
whole different ballgame. And so when we're dealing with those things, um I think it's really, really good to realize that those are the symptoms, not the actual problem. Well, you have to dig a little deeper to see
Totally.
the actual problem. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and something that's so cool about that, or like a fun side thing to know, is that when you start to see things that way, the journey actually becomes so beautiful. A lot
Mm-hmm.
of times we think, oh, my journey will be beautiful after I get rid of all this trauma, after I'm done with pornography and we always put like a number on it, right? I got to be free or, abstain for 6 months or a year, and then I can be happy and enjoy my journey. But if you're willing to see those symptoms as invitations to learn about you and what's actually going on, your journey can be beautiful, like right now.
Oh, yes. Ah, I
Let's
love
do
that.
it.
I love that. That is so good. Yes. Yes. Oh, okay. I'm just going to say that again because that is something you don't have to wait until the if this happens then, if this happens then. No, it can be a right now beautiful journey. And I think you're totally right. As I look back through my own personal healing journey, um, it was so good and so beautiful and so amazing and so fantastic right when I chose to heal.
Yeah.
That's when it shifted. You know what I mean? And I love that. I love that you can say, no, this can actually be gorgeous now.
So
That like gave me goosebumps. I love that.
I was going to say that too. I got the chills. So cool.
Oh, that was a good one. Okay, so let's talk about the trust boundary, obviously, because that is, the whole point of today's podcast. And how, like, for me, I hear like this question all the time from my clients, like, how do I trust him again? How do I trust this person that has hurt me again? And um, I honestly have to say that that is not my boundary. Trusting another person is not my boundary. That's not my responsibility. You know what I mean? If somebody's broken my trust, then it's actually the other person's responsibility to regain it. But what my responsibility is, and it does help me learn to trust other people, is to trust myself first. Because if I feel trustworthy with me, then I can recognize the signs of other people that are trustworthy.
Hmm.
You know what I mean?
I like that.
So tell me about your trust boundary. Like, what things did you have to do? Because, I mean, like, this is something that men and women who struggle with pornography and struggle with trauma, like, they don't trust themselves. Like, they really have a hard time with that. So, what was the catalyst? Like, what was the shift for you? What made you decide to trust yourself? So, how do you feel about boundaries? It's a legitimate question. A lot of people come to me really struggling with this concept. They often feel guilty for setting boundaries, or they're not sure about even what a boundary is. You know, they've heard the term, set the boundary, things like that, but that's really confusing for them because it's not something that's well taught in our society nowadays, right? They know that boundaries are really important to having healthy, constructive, supportive, and wonderful relationships, but why? And oftentimes they also know that they feel like their boundaries are being violated, but they can't quite pinpoint what the boundary is that's being violated. That's why I've created the Clarifying and Creating Your Boundaries free PDF. You can find out what your boundaries are, how to tune in to what the boundary needs to be, and how to effectively create and communicate your boundary so that way you stay in this place that respects you, respects the other person, but also gives you the confidence in your boundaries so that way you stop being gaslighted, disrespected, and unseen. Having your boundaries really clear gives you a voice and also helps the other person stay in accountability with themselves. So that's not a role that you have to take on anymore. So if you are ready to really have clear boundaries, to really understand what your role is in the boundary, and to give yourself some safety and some protection against people that might try to gaslight you or are just being disrespectful, go grab my Creating and Clarifying Your Boundary PDF at erinandersonthetraumacoach.com. And while you're there, let's schedule a call with me. Come have a chat with me so that way I can really help you master this particular skill, creating boundaries, clarifying the boundary, communicating that boundary, and so that way I can also help you have relationships that show up to support you, cherish you, and love you.
Whew. I'm like I'm scanning my timeline and like, where did that start? Well, just as a thought, as I'm thinking about that, I think a lot of people try to try to blame their struggle with pornography, for example, as the reason they can't trust themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So like, oh, because I've messed up with pornography so many times, I can't trust myself. And for sure that has an impact. But with almost anything, anytime you're blaming something or blaming porn as like the reason you feel this way or experience a struggle, I like to invite people to consider that part of that struggle was actually before pornography. Like you might actually jump into pornography when you're afraid to trust yourself. And like it might be, chicken or the egg kind of thing. Like that
Yeah.
lack of self trust may actually motivate you to run to porn to escape those fears. Um, so anyway, just kind of a thought there. I think for me, there's a really important moment of self trust, and it started with self distrust actually. Um, One of the biggest, like, well, let's see, I want to tell both those pieces. The first, for me, the first thing that you can trust, or the first thing I started to trust, was that my emotions weren't bad, that they were just
I like
indication.
that.
Maybe you've heard people say like the check engine light metaphor.
Mm-hmm.
I started to see my emotions instead of like, oh crap, I'm not supposed to feel sad, I've got to show up as a happy person. Instead, I'd be like, wait, why am I sad? And to me, that's like the most simple trust you can exercise in yourself, is to ask a question. Like, oh, I'm screaming my brains out right now. Why am I screaming? Or like, oh, I'm blaming my significant other for the way they asked me to do the dishes, why am I doing that? What's really going on, which is your question from
Hmm.
before. I think that shows trust. And so for me, I started to do that sometime after that friend was like, "Hey, are you struggling with shame?" And it was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm going to like die under this mountain of shame." And so I just started to ask questions. Um, you asked like, what was the catalyst? I'm trying to find how I did that.
Well, you're talking about asking really good questions, and I think that you kind of did answer answer
Cool.
that
Yeah.
because that for me, asking yourself questions can be terrifying. Like a lot of people get really scared about that one thing, but it's so empowering.
Hmm.
Like it's literally the shovel that you dug yourself out from the mountain, because you cannot, like, just in my opinion, you cannot trust yourself if you're not asking yourself good questions.
Nice.
You know
Yeah.
what I mean? And so I think you actually hit the nail right on the head there, saying, I started asking myself good questions and started saying things like, well, why am I sad? Why do I feel angry? Why do I feel XYZ? And getting really in tune because I feel like not trusting yourself is a symptom of being out of tune with yourself. You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Thoughts on that?
Yeah, I love that. Well, I was thinking like I love the word practice. Like, oh, I want to practice trusting myself so I can practice asking questions. Because if you're
Mm-hmm.
not asking questions, you're kind of, it's almost like you've already dismissed it as like, oh, I can't change. I'm broken. So I just have to try to stop doing the bad thing I'm doing or feeling this way. Instead, I think you can say, okay, I trust myself at least enough to ask a question because I trust I could maybe get an answer. That's that tiny
Mm-hmm.
like seed of trust. I trust if I ask a question, I might get an answer.
Or even trust yourself to get the answer. Like for me,
Mhm.
it took some time sometimes to get answers, and it still does to this day. Like an answer that just barely came up and slapped me aside the head a couple of days ago was, "You overthink things." And I was like, "Oh, you're right, I do." Oh, But the thing is that made me trust myself even more because I'm like, "Oh, okay, now I have something I can deal with." Am I sure what I'm going to do about it yet? No. But the fact that I'm aware means that now I can know I can think about my next steps. You know what I
Mhm.
mean?
Yeah,
Because I think that the reason why we don't trust other people or the reason why we don't trust ourselves is because we're not 100% sure what to expect or what to be aware of. You know what I mean? It's a certain level of unawareness that causes these kinds of things to happen.
sure. Yeah, I love your thoughts on getting answers. I think culturally, whether it's in just like the world culture or like any church culture, if you want to say it that way, a lot of times I think we do this thing where we say like, oh, I just trust God. I only want to trust him, or I only trust the Bible or the scriptures or the prophets. And I've even heard some people say that as like a bragging point. Like they say it as if it's like a really good thing. Like, oh, I don't trust myself, but so I just trust God. And I think that's
Mm.
interesting. Um,
Good word.
like if that's what you're feeling, like cool, maybe ask some questions about why you don't trust yourself. But I think it can become a crutch. One perspective that was powerful for me is to realize like for my personal belief is that our purpose on this earth is to become more like God, more like Jesus Christ, and eventually we can become like him and receive all that he has. And so my question would be like, at what point in your journey would you be allowed to trust yourself? Is it zero until you get to the judgment bar? And then all of a sudden you're going to like learn how to trust yourself overnight? Or maybe it's this it's a journey. Maybe it's a practice. And so
Yes.
I've loved saying like, I trust, obviously maybe you could say I trust God the most. And then I'm also practicing to trust me. For me, if I trust Christ on a deep, deep level, then I trust that it's okay for me to have experiences. It's okay for me to learn. Even if I trust myself today and it turns out I was kind of wrong, like, oh, oops, I thought I had an impression to go like serve someone and I was wrong. I don't know. That's a dumb example.
Yes.
But
No, actually, I think
even,
it's a good one.
yeah, like even
I've
if
been
I was
there.
wrong.
Been
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. And like, even if I was wrong, I trust in myself and I trust God so much that he can work out the details on the other side of that. And, it's not going to be the end. Sometimes we think if we make a mistake, then we're like lost for eternity, which is really sad.
Yes, I agree. I totally agree. And the other thing I wanted to point out here too, Kyson, that was super powerful about what you just said was, I trust God, but I don't trust myself. Well, where do you think Christ came from, for crying out loud? He started out as a baby. He had to trust his mother to feed him. He was completely helpless at one point. At one point in his journey, he was completely helpless, so I guarantee he had to learn self trust as well.
Yeah.
And so, if we're really going to pattern our lives after him and we're going to trust God, I think trusting ourselves is the next level of trusting God. You know what I mean?
Whoa. Cause there's this point where trusting, like if you put the word journey in there, like, do I trust this journey? To me, that's where like my trust in God and trust in self meet. Cause God said, here's a plan. Do you want to go learn some stuff? And the core question is, do you trust me and do you trust you to go on this journey? Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I think that might be the most basic level of trust. Like, even if you can't trust yourself, or if you're struggling to trust yourself today, or like in a certain decision, or to not look at porn, or to not get triggered by a husband that looks at porn, or whatever it is that you're trying to
Mm-hmm.
trust. The most basic trust level I think you can practice is like, I'm going to trust that this journey is for me, or I'm going to trust that there's something in
Yes.
it for me.
And that this journey is like this is the one that I love is I'm gonna trust that this journey is gonna take me to my mission, my purpose.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? Because I mean, if you think about it, if you I hadn't experienced that deep seated trauma like I had, I wouldn't be coaching trauma. I
Right.
wouldn't have the experience. Like there's something to be said about book learning. Don't get me wrong. And the college degrees. I have a bachelor's degree. It wasn't easy to get. So I really, really respect people that go out and they get those degrees and their masters and their doctorates and so on. Like that's great. And I'm one of them. I'm a college graduate myself. But I will say that I did not get my best education in the classroom. I got my best education in the experience of the classroom. You know what I mean? And now, because of that experience, I'm a fantastic teacher. And I can say that with confidence because I am. But when it comes to teaching women how to overcome trauma and trust themselves, because that really is what they're wanting, right? And for you, helping men trust themselves to be immune from porn and to live their highest and best lives. Like that's literally what these people want, right? Well, we had to have been where they're at and have grown past it. That's experience and education at its finest. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And I see like a vision of the future in a sense here as you talk about that. Like, imagine a community of both men and women, and community of families where we've all overcome whatever our journey has brought to us, whatever
Mm-hmm.
struggles, and we've trusted ourselves and trusted God to bring us through those moments. And like, I just picture like, what if everyone had like the knowledge and the love and the self trust to help other people trust, like they would just start to
Mm-hmm.
spread like a ripple effect. Like, when you go and talk to someone, they don't shut you down or they don't shame you, but they invite you to trust God and to trust yourself. And how cool that would be to let that spread from, one person in your family to two and to the whole family and then to the extended family. Like it could be so cool. And maybe that's, one of the elements of Zion, of one heart and
Oh,
one
I
mind.
love it.
We trust together.
Yes, I love that so much. I wanted to bring you back to a piece that you mentioned earlier because I feel like this is something that we definitely need to talk about. Like it's a killer of trust, and that is blame.
Oh, heck
You
yeah.
know, blaming the porn addiction, blaming the husband, blame, blaming the government for why my finances look so crappy, blaming someone else, and it's literally giving away our power, like giving away our ability to own our lives. Like it's that whole I cannot be. You're gonna hear my daughter, by the way, in the background. She thinks she's a guest speaker. But it's giving away that blame, and like it's literally putting your ability to change something in someone else's hands. You know what I mean?
Wow. Yeah.
And like I really do feel like that is one of the biggest killers of success and healing and immunity and trust. I mean, how can you gain trust in yourselves if you're constantly blaming someone else and realizing that like you're literally focusing on the untrust, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Holy smokes. That I want to share a story that like connects right to that blame. After me and Isabel, my wife, we got married. I had been in abstinence from porn, right? So I wasn't using porn, but I was feeling tempted often, like
Mhm.
sometimes every day or, every week. So then I was like, well, this is what you do, right? You just hold on tight, play lots of Call of Duty to distract yourself or whatever. Like that's what a lot of people do. We just try to run from it. And what's cool is at the time, I had a coach who was like a business coach. We weren't focusing on pornography at all, but I started to bring up like, I feel like my wife is, like I joke about the dishes thing because it's like it was so real. I'd be like, oh, she's like always telling me to do the dishes like in a way that feels like she's controlling me. And so I was blaming a lot, like, oh, my wife is telling me this and the way she treats me in this situation, and just blame and blame and blame. And my coach was like, I can't remember exactly the questions he asked, but he asked a few questions, which is a sign of trust, asked me to
Mhm.
trust myself by asking those questions. And at the bottom of it was this realization where he was like, Kyson, are you willing to take 100% accountability for your emotions, beliefs, and actions?
And
And,
success. I want to add
and,
that in
and
there.
yeah,
Yeah,
totally. And success.
right?
And what's crazy is in that moment, with all the context, it terrified me. I was terrified of that question. And I took a minute and, I told him I was terrified and we talked about it. And by the end of that call, I felt confident that I could at least commit to practice being accountable. And what's so cool is a totally unexpected result of this conversation and of me taking accountability. That was the first time in my life since I had started pornography at like, 9 or 10, the first time in my life that the waters were still. I no longer felt the desire for porn. And we weren't even talking
Oh,
about it. It was a totally separate subject. But once I
right.
took accountability, then things shifted and that freedom, that immunity to porn started to open up and spread.
So I got two questions. Was that Coach Daniel Adams?
It was definitely Daniel.
I knew it.
Yeah.
He's been a guest speaker on our on this podcast before too. So, and
Yeah.
he's actually scheduled for another future episode as well because I love Daniel. I think he's fantastic. But that's like classic
Yeah.
Daniel Adams
Yeah. That's so funny
right
that you knew
there.
that
So,
from that question.
yes. So it's totally okay. We can praise Daniel on this podcast. We love Daniel.
Oh, yeah.
Um, so the other thing I wanted to say was accountability. Like that's a word that a lot of people are scared of. Like they're terrified of
Mm-hmm.
the word accountability, because they're like, oh my gosh, now somebody else has to actually see this, or I'm gonna have to like actually face that. Like it's terrifying. But you know what? That level of accountability is freedom. It is like the start of that immunity. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And I love, love, love how you've said that taking accountability, like full accountability for my life, was when the waters were able to calm enough for me to actually start the trust process.
Nice.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Um, and it was really similar for me too in healing my trauma, because when you're constantly in blame, 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 blame mode, you're actually perpetuating the cycle of pain. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And constantly like not able to focus on the things you actually need to focus on to be able to heal. Um and and I see like blame so much in our society. Like I said, I mean, I will say I'm not a fan of our current governmental leadership. I'll leave it there. We're putting that away now. Here's a toy. Now we're putting it away. Anyway, but I cannot blame him for the way my life looks at all. And I think that, thinking that way, like, yeah, is he doing some crazy crappy stuff? Yes, I really do think he is. And this, like I said, and I will own, like, own. This is my personal opinion. I am owning this, okay? So if you're listening and you don't agree, I just know I still love you. Okay, so please love me still. Like, we can all get along.
Totally.
But, you know, I don't feel like he's making good decisions. And I'm just saying like this as an example. Because we can say those exact same things to like a dad. Like I know for, your story and like talks a little bit about your dad and how you felt kind of scared of what he would do. And so there's the shame, right?
Sure.
Um, for me, my story was, I would blame my husband for my pain. I would blame my mom for my pain. I would blame my grandma for my pain, and people that I didn't feel like were showing up the way they should. Were they showing up? No, but I wasn't either.
Right.
That's the point. Because, you look at all these people that are in our lives, the administration, my husband, my grandma, my mom, my neighbor, my coworker. Like there are a lot of people that bring trauma into our lives and leave trauma in our lives, honestly. We're Unless if we're going to go live in our basement for several years, honestly, that doesn't even work. You cannot avoid trauma in this life. It just it doesn't happen. You might be able to avoid relationships, which is a really sad life. That in and of itself brings trauma, you know, and but you cannot avoid it. But you're at the center of it because it's your life. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I yeah, absolutely. Like one of the most common, or I think in the first, three or four questions when working with people is like, who are you blaming, basically? Or, where are you giving away your power or
Mhm.
giving away your accountability? And that's been such an interesting pattern to notice in myself. Like I talked about blaming my wife for whatever with the
Mhm.
dishes, and then you brought up my dad, and honestly, like pretty much anyone who's been in my life has been someone to blame, because it's sometimes it's scary to take accountability,
Mhm.
but at the core it becomes so much, it becomes so much more, life becomes more beautiful when you choose to be accountable, to create, and to look at what you actually desire.
Yeah, exactly. And I think about my teenager. He's 15. He's like such a fantastic kid. But it's like I talk to him a lot about ownership and responsibility and accountability, and these are like keys that open the door to, you know, living immune from porn and living immune from trauma. And, you know, porn. Let me backtrack here for just a second. Porn is also, I feel like, one of those things we cannot avoid in this life anymore. You know what I mean? I mean, kids are getting exposed to it so young,
Hmm.
3, 4 years old now. And it's a very sad world we live in. It's that's true. But what's not being taught is accountability, ownership, and responsibility. Those three keys, I think, once they're introduced and they're taken as like a moral code, it helps us find that trust and that immunity from these struggles that we have in our lives. And I think about my 15-year-old son, and he's dealt with some serious trauma in his life. He had a teacher that told him he was stupid. She hated him. She kicked him out on the corner of like their school and wouldn't let him in the classroom some days, and never had anything good to say about him. And he really internalized a lot of that. And I saw during that year, I saw so many concerning things with my son, and I didn't know what was going on. And he carried that trauma for years and years and years. That trauma eventually turned into a pornography addiction. And, feeling like he was a failure and failing in things like his schoolwork. Like he went to school and it was such a trigger for him for what he went through that he would just fail every class.
Wow.
But what we did with him is we started implementing like those three things, the ownership, accountability, and responsibility. And we started with the ownership tier there, and asking him questions and helping him own his emotions and he would try to blame the teacher, and like give away that power. And we would ask him questions like, do you still want her to have control of your life? You know? And this was a long journey. I mean, it's taken us, oh my goodness, how many years? 7 years. 7 years to get him to this point, but to this year, like he's really, really owned the responsibility aspect and the accountability aspect of things. And now you see this kid that went from anger and depression and at such a young, tender age, to crazy happy, crazy confident, um, getting like just acing his grades this year and doing so good. And like my whole reason why I'm saying this is because it took him from like I think that trauma can sometimes rob us of our trust. You know what I mean? And so we tend to kind of grasp at straws, and one of those straws is pornography or like trauma, more trauma. But it took him from doing that to actually anchoring himself. You know what I mean?
Mm. Yeah, those are great. I love all those words. Anchoring, confidence is like, oh, that's trust. That's for
Mhm.
sure trust. What a cool journey that he's been on. And especially to be, some people wait till way later in life to start trusting themselves enough to ask questions. Because parents can ask a million questions, but it does take the person, whoever it is, you have to decide, I'm going to trust and actually let that question get down into my heart.
Yes, I agree. I totally agree. So, we got a couple of minutes left with you, Kyson, and this has been like such a Oh, fantastic conversation. So good. So juicy. I love it. Um, so tell us, what are some questions you love to ask yourself now? Like you're on the other side of the struggle, literally, um, where you have gone from, I struggle with porn, I struggle with Fortnite,
Call of Duty, but yeah,
distraction. Yeah, right. Um, but now here you are, you're anchored. Like I've told you this so many times, like you are like one of the most anchored, grounded people I know. And you're building a business off of this. You're helping people free themselves from porn. So, what are the questions you ask yourself now at this point?
that's a sweet question. Um, I start with a breath, like I just did, right? Like when something comes up, because I guess like we see porn as like the ultimate problem, and a lot of times you think once you're done with porn, that's the last, okay, now my life's good. But realistically, it's like the same patterns of blame might still be there. Like I said, I might escape to Call of Duty sometimes when I'm freaked out about something. So I try to just observe, like, oh, I'm playing a lot of Call of Duty today, or like feels like I'm not even playing to have fun. I'm like I'm in here to just not feel. And so when I observe those things, I'll take a breath or two, trust myself, give myself permission to be there. And then one of my favorite questions is just like, what piece of me, this is one I've been asking recently, what piece of me is feeling afraid right now? What piece of me wants to play a ton of Call of Duty? Or what piece of me is like looking for a whole bunch of sugar in the kitchen? Um, what
I
piece of
might
me
be.
is like eating 6 Otter Pops a day, and feeding my inner child some dyed sugar water. It's been crazy. Um, and so like, yeah, obviously I don't think there needs to be any shame or blame in those areas. Just
No.
just curious, like, it seems like a piece of me is pretty afraid. What am I afraid of? And so um I'll sit in those questions and actually try to identify like what age piece of me, who do I picture? Like, oh, my 15-year old self comes to mind, and I'll just hang out with him for a sec. Like, hey man, what's up? Are you running from something? It's like, oh yeah, this situation comes to mind, and I'll work through it. But
Mm-hmm.
ultimately, it's about identifying like what fears do you have going on, because anytime there's a temptation, I do like air quotes for that. Like temptation, we like to sometimes blame on the devil. Like, oh, he's
Mm-hmm.
making me feel tempted. But the truth is, you can't feel tempted for something that you're not uh, actually wanting, or that you're not afraid of, if that makes sense. Like
Yes, absolutely.
beneath temptation, there is fear. And so that's one of the recent things I've been thinking about. And I actually created recently a free mini course on temptation. So you can check that out at my website, kysonkid.com. But it's a free mini course that helps you figure out what are the fears, what questions to ask yourself to get in touch with some of the fears beneath your temptations. And so
Oh, I
that
love
applies to
that.
pornography, but it like applies very well to everything, Otter Pops and Call of Duty and whatever.
Otter Pops and Call of Duty.
Yeah,
I love it. And I think doing like I talk about that inner child work because, anytime you're dealing with trauma, you have an inner child that's offended every time. Like I've been coaching this for 10 years, and that's always been the case, is that inner child is offended at some point.
totally.
And when you just check in with yourself, like I think that what you're talking about is that awareness. Just be aware. And like, I know for me, like I'm a lot more aware now, and like that's kind of like one of those nuggets that becomes a habit. You know what I mean? Just being super aware of where you're at, what you're thinking. Um, like if I'm freaking out at my kids, I may or may not do that. But if I'm sitting there like freaking out at my kids, no, 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 no. Sorry. Give me the keys, please. My little girl just walked in, guys. Sorry, she thinks that she can do that. I don't like. She's figured out how to unlock the door.
That's so smart. Wow.
Yeah, it really is, little turkey. Okay. Okay. So I'm just gonna like take these keys. And we are, I'm a mom, and I have to record this podcast in mom time. So anyway, but I was just talking back about, this awareness and how awareness is one of those keys for helping, like it's one of those what is the word I'm looking for? It is one of it's a foundation. It's like a corner piece to your foundation of being immune to porn or being free from trauma. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And to creating the life you actually want.
I love that. The question that comes to mind, like if someone out there is like looking to get started in building awareness and starting that journey, a great question to go to God with is like, Heavenly Father, are you okay with my journey? Because a lot of times we get freaked out that what we've been through is too much or we're not good enough and we have to fix it on our own. For me, that's been a powerful question. Like, are you okay with me in the sense that, like, can I still work with you right now? And for
Mm-hmm.
me, that gave me the faith to say, okay, I'm going to start noticing what I think, being aware of what I feel, and just I'm going to ask questions and receive, ask and receive. And then you just go
Wow.
forever. And then boom, your entire eternity is beautiful. No, I'm just kidding. For real,
C'est
that's a great.
bestial. I love that. I love that question. I think that's what I'm actually going to start adopting is how do you feel about my journey?
Mm.
You know what I mean?
Cool.
I love that.
It's
I
like how many
really love
times can you
that.
get the chills during one podcast? I
I
guess.
know, right? Ooh, so much goodness. So much goodness. All right. Well, Kyson, I've got a little girl that's talking to me through the door
Awesome.
now. I want a movie. I want a movie. I'm going to go help her be accountable for her emotions.
I trust you. I trust you so much in that, and I trust her.
Yes, we trust her. We love her. And it's, wow, really, like, I'm looking at these keys right now, like, holy cow, like, wow, she's so smart. Anyway, so, I want to add just one more thing, because I think it's really important to trust the imperfection too. Like this podcast was great until my daughter interrupted it, right? And I was actually just a minute ago thinking, oh, I'll just put this on GarageBand, I'll edit that part out. But you know what? I actually think I'm going to keep it
Cool.
because I feel like that's actually an integral trusting part, like a part of trusting myself
Mm,
is allowing things to happen and showing up sometimes in like being okay with being imperfect. You know what I mean?
totally. Yeah, because you could say, "Oh, what are people going to feel? What if they feel weird listening to that part?" But instead, we're going to trust everyone listening that they can
Mm-hmm.
have the experience they have, and it's going to be awesome.
Well, and also trust that, you know, it's okay to be imperfect.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? Like, if I can be imperfect and Kyson can be imperfect, you guys can totally be imperfect, but that doesn't mean it has to stop the goodness or stop the beauty that you can create.
yeah,
You know what I mean? Like, totally add in the imperfection and love it all.
I love it.
So. Awesome. Kyson, thanks so much. Now, you mentioned already about your freebie, which is tell us again about that freebie one more time.
Yeah, so it's a mini course on navigating temptation. It's got a short video that does some cool explanation on like new perspective about how to face your temptation, and then a little workbook that gives you some sweet questions. So if you want to go right to the URL, it's Kyson Kidd, excuse me, kysonkid.com/resolve temptation. But if you just go to kysonkid.com, you'll find it. So
Perfect. I love it. All right, Kyson, this was such a good episode, such a juicy podcast, full of really, really good nuggets. And we will definitely have Kyson back on this podcast again, listeners. And for now, I will see you guys next week. And we'll be talking about the organization boundary with Jenny Layton. See you guys next time, guys. Bye, Kyson. Bye,
Yeah, thank you so
everyone.
much. Bye.
Bye. Hey guys, thanks so much for hanging out with me today and listening in on this podcasting episode. Don't forget to tune in next week. It's gonna be